While banks around the world many are doing well, some are struggling, but the ones that normally get challenged are the ones that are relatively small to mid-size. And you can be generous about them, you can call them small banks, you can call them emerging banks, it's a more polite word. But the challenge for a small or emerging bank is how to compete with the big boys in the market. And very often the smaller banks struggle with getting the business model right. So I think, from my standpoint, today's conversation is really about that if I'm going to run a small to mid-sized bank as a CEO, what are the 5 or 6 successful strategies to not only survive but succeed and be competitive? And my first recommendation to any CEO of a mid-sized bank would be, don't try to compete with the big boys, you lose, right? You just don't have the asset book that you can use to lend at the scale that they can lend, and therefore you're never going to have a corporate book. At best, you'll do well with an SME commercial book. So let's be honest that you're not going to be able to compete with the big boys. Therefore, you can't just say, I'll do what they do and hopefully I'll do better. That won't work, right? There's a there's great lessons that comes out of the community banking space in the US. The US has had a large number of community banks, somewhere around 4,000 to 5,000, that have survived over significant periods of time. And in fact, if you look at their ROE and ROA numbers, they are very competitive to the big boys. And they also actually have not really gone under. So even in difficult economic conditions, they have continued to do well. So I've always kind of thought about, what's the secret sauce that makes a small to mid-sized bank in a highly competitive US market continue to succeed? And are there lessons that we can take around the world besides some other things we could do right? And one of the things that the community banks in the US have done really well is that they get to know their community inside out. So they have been true to the community, right? So they are clear that they operate in a certain catchment area. In that catchment area, they understand the customer at far more sophisticated levels than an average CRM knowledge of customer would be. They build personal relationships. The branch managers of these banks typically has the old role that a branch manager had with his or her customer. Being the branch managers belong to the community. So a very important reason as to why these banks have succeeded is that they've really focused on knowing their customers and being part of the community. And therefore, I think having a good retail book in certain catchment areas in certain communities is an important part of the business model, because also, as we know, that retail generally gives us better yields, and therefore it also protects your ROA and ROE numbers, right? So one is, I think, belong to the community and understand your community, work with the community, engage with the community is a big part of that success. The second part to that is that you just can't do retail. You need to build some kind of commercial SME book, right? And the other piece that does really well is that they look at the customer, and if there are customers that are quote-unquote family-owned businesses or entrepreneurs, where you have their retail accounts, you can actually build a relationship with them to have both their personal account as well as their retail, as well as their SME accounts, right? And therefore that gives you a 360-degree relationship with the customer. It also gives you more leverage. And therefore I think that has also worked well for them, right? And therefore doing the SME book right is also core to success. Now the challenge with SME books is risk, right? Because credit risk is always generally higher with smaller to mid-sized organizations. And over there, I would recommend that you don't just run algorithms at the back office on assessing credit risk. I think doing it somewhat the old-fashioned way, where a senior credit officer or the branch manager is able to provide qualitative inputs about the credit, about the individual, can make a big difference. And therefore design a credit scorecard that has a combination of, shall I say, qualitative measurement and quantitative measurement. The last point I'd make today on this subject is try to be a specialist, right? Any organization that is small or mid-sized, unless you are innovative and distinctive and unique in a certain area, nobody will come to you, right? And therefore, there are many examples of banks around the world that are for example, trade finance banks, where they say, listen, you know what, there's a trade finance route between my country and 5 other countries where I'm located. So I'm just going to finance the letters of credit, and I will make a combination of fee income and interest income. So I think having strong fee income has also a significant impact on the bottom line. And by focusing on the trade routes, then I become a trade specialist as a bank. And there are plenty of examples on the planet that do it, right? And if I was to add just one last closing comment on it, since we're in the age of digital, we have no choice but to not do something about digital, even if your bank is small and mid-sized. Keep the front end a little bit mixed between hybrid, between digital and personable, so that you can shake somebody's hand at the branch and keep some of those branches alive. But you should be more than welcome to digitize the back end so that you get all the productivity and efficiency that you're seeking as a smaller bank here.